Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a very, very special webinar this evening that I'm so glad to be hosting and so glad to share with all of you guys. And it's an unusual webinar because this is the first webinar Pete Fortunato has ever done. I found that out this morning when we were discussing how does he get his pictures up on the screen. He's not the kind of educator that spends 300 days a year on the road or does a bunch of webinars and sells a lot of courses and makes his money that way. He's a guy who got into real estate right out of college in the mid-60s and started out as a real estate agent and got some clients and did some transactions and got some properties of his own. And 10 years later, in 1975, he had so many of his own investments that he was able to kind of retire from retirement. He never really had a real job. But by 75, he was just living off of his own real estate investments. And some of the stuff you're going to hear tonight is going to be really different than what you're used to hearing from the guys who do logbooks and tapes for a living. There's going to be some language that you're not used to. There's going to be some terms that you're not used to, and certainly we're very willing to stop and explain anything that you're hearing that is just a different word used for something than you were used to. But I really hope that you have some note paper or you're taking notes on your computer while you're watching slides or something, because I am telling you that this guy is the most brilliant mind in creative real estate today. And I have traveled across the country to spend 2 and 3 days with him learning more about how to put together transactions that benefit everybody and yet don't involve banks, and many times, for reasons I'm sure you'll hear sometime in the next hour, don't include taxes either. And, I know a lot of you guys, you've heard me talk about Pete, you've heard Drew talk about Pete, you've heard your group leaders talk about Pete, but you've never actually gotten to hear him. So congratulations. You're in for quite a ride tonight, and when we get finished, we're going to tell you how you can spend 2 days with Pete in August here in Cincinnati at just an almost sinfully cheap price. So looks like the number of folks who are jumping online has slowed down. We are going to go ahead and get started. Pete, you are with us, yes?
I'm here.
Excellent. All right, so you just tell me what picture you want on screen. I will make sure it's up there, and I will mute myself and let you share your 45 years of expertise with these folks.
Okay, well, if you would please just put a picture of the house, because I think that's helpful in terms of people seeing what it is I typically talk about. But
all right, will do.
Okay?
Yep.
Okay. All right, well, my name is Pete Fortunato, and as Vena said to you, before I was in real estate, I was in high school. And as those of you who know me know, I totally hated being in high school. Couldn't wait to get out. And in my junior year, when I went to talk to my guidance counselor, and she said, "What do you want to be after you graduate?" And I said, "Unemployed." She felt that was an improper response and raised Cain, and I had to explain to her that I wanted to be comfortably unemployed. That didn't mean sleeping under a bridge. That meant having enough assets to provide my income so that I didn't have to work. So I was free to do whatever I wanted to do. So one of the things I'm going to talk about an awful lot is doing things on purpose. I set out to get enough assets so that the assets could provide my living. And I didn't have to give up my time, my skill, my labor, my energy to earn a living. So that was my goal. Well, as you can imagine, when I got out of high school, I had no money. I had no net worth. Those of you who know John Shaw know that John says, do you remember when our net worth was in our gas tank? Well, when I got out of high school, I didn't have a gas tank. I went and became a real estate agent because as an agent, I didn't have to have any inventory. I could sell other people's houses. I could lease other people's houses. And I could make a profit. I could make a living without having to have a great deal of inventory. I needed to work hard, certainly. I needed to study, and the more I learned, the more efficiently I could earn. But I did that. I earned a surplus. I gained a reputation. It took me 2 years to acquire my very first house. It took me 10 years from 65 to 75 before I had enough rentals, enough cash flow from rentals, so that I didn't have to work. Now, that didn't mean I was ready to travel the world and do anything and everything I wanted. It means that I didn't have to work, so I was free to pursue whatever I wanted to pursue. That was very, very important to me. That was my goal. It took me a decade to get there. Now, along the way, I was blessed to go into real estate in the middle 60s when the realtors I met were really and truly remarkable transaction makers. And they were proud of the fact that people came to a realtor because they could build a deal no one else could or would build. And I was infected by that. I was not only taught by so many and watched so many of them with incredible admiration as they showed me how to do deals, but I learned to structure transactions and to make the results what I wanted them to be. So with that attitude, I went into the real estate business. And again, we're going to talk about doing things on purpose. My dad was a real estate agent, a realtor, a great people person, but he did residential real estate. And so my dad, I talked to my sister yesterday, and she just had a client come back to the Fortunato office up in Massachusetts to sell the house they bought from my dad 45 years ago. Well, I can't wait 45 years for the next deal from somebody. So I quickly went from real estate as a realtor dealing with consumers who wanted to live in a house who made a deal every generation to investors, again doing it on purpose, who bought 2 or 3 houses a year and did some exchanging. And that was fantastic for me. That enabled me to build a business. Now, when I began showing real estate, showing anything to anybody that was trying to make a living and as I was trying to learn, I found that my personality might be wrong for the residential real estate as well as my temperament for waiting for another deal for a generation. But one day I found myself saying to a lady, "What can you do in a pink bathroom you can't do in a blue bathroom?" She fired me, and from then on I dealt only with investors. One of the things that you'll see on that house in front of you is all the pieces of a deal. And what I did is when I was 18 years old, I looked like I was 14. And I had to show people that I was competent. I was lucky to be in a large family in a small town of 37,000 people. So the trust part of real estate was easy for me because it was built by a family and I was essentially standing on their shoulders. But the competence part, people didn't have a lot of expectations when they looked at an 18-year-old who looked like he was 14. So I took the topics on that house that you see in front of you, and I offered a free real estate seminar. Now, that was February of 1966, the first time I did that. I had 10 people show up, 12 invited, 10 of them showed up. 2 of them came back and became clients of mine. And from then on, I did that talking about those topics, profit, cash flow, and taxes being the income part of real estate. And appreciation and by the way, we all believed in appreciation back in 65. It wasn't until 2006 that I learned that sometimes that went into reverse. And amortization as what built our net worth. And the use component and the thrill of management of the property were the use component, which is the center, the most important part of the real estate deal. That's what generates all the incomes and all the controls are based upon use, and that's why being able to manage becomes so very critical for people. Now, underneath it, I've got a foundation. Foundation is security. And if you don't take the time to build the security, people won't do business with you. People do good business with people they like. That means you need to spend some time establishing a rapport. That's why all the yellow letters and all the computer-generated Dropbox stuff will never, ever generate the good deals that can be made face-to-face. You have to get in touch with other people. Because remember, I'm starting with no income, no credibility, and essentially no job. Though I was a realtor, nobody believed you really could make money as an 18-year-old realtor. So one of the very first things that I learned was that no one in the entire world wants dollars. Dollars are simply a conduit taking them from something they want less into something they want more. So understanding that dollars are a conduit was very critical, because all commerce happens as a result of an exchange. And commerce happens because people are different. And different people like different things. For example, I have a friend who really thinks it's a good idea that he owns a big boat. And to me, I see nothing but, what do they call it, a giant hole in the water into which you throw money. So because of our different likes and dislikes, it's easy for us to do business. If I give him a boat, he'll love it. And if he gives me anything that doesn't cost me money, I'll like it better than a boat. So in any case, it is the exchange, it is the difference in people that makes deals happen. Now, understanding that...
Wait, Pete, I'm sorry. I'm going to do one of those things where I'm going to stop you and ask you to explain the use of a word.
Okay.
That is the way you talk, but I think might mean something different to the people that are listening. This idea of security.
Okay.
Most people hear security, they hear like, oh, well, you know, the house is security for the loan, and that's not what you're talking about when you say the foundation of all these deals is security.
Okay.
What are you talking about?
All right. Security is comprised of several things. Security means people having limited or no fear that they will lose. And that starts with the confidence and trustworthiness of the person that they're dealing with. That means you have to establish some rapport. That is part of the character of that person. Now, the next thing that you require is some collateral. I don't think there's anyone out here who's dealt with all the years that I've done business who would believe that I wouldn't keep my promise to them. If I promised to pay $1,000 a month. But that doesn't mean I might walk out the door and get hit by a car. And so, as well as coming across as a confident and trustworthy person, I need to give collateral for the note as well. And that's the lien, the first mortgage, the deed of trust that's given against a property that satisfies the person who is extending credit to you. Without that comfortable feeling, without that security, most people will not do business. Is that helpful?
Solves it for me.
Okay. So now my next project is, how do I get some assets, and how many are enough? Now, in my world, I need $4,000 a month to live. Now, that's living in Florida. That's a 67-year-old man. And $4,000 a month, I can do anything I want to do. Now, recognize I have no life outside of the real estate and my time interfering in the lives of others who also are real estate people. I love what I do. I do a lot of reading, spend a lot of time sitting on my dock reading. And so I don't have a tremendous amount of expenses. But for me, that is $4,000 a month that it takes to live. Now, that was my goal, remember, to be comfortably unemployed. Well, to get to that, I find that I now can get one house that will rent for $1,250 a month. That's a nice house in a nice neighborhood. Neighborhood being the single most important key to managing the houses that I buy. My average tenant is 9.5 years from the time I rent to them to the time that they betray me and leave the house. Now, those houses that rent for $12.50 a month net $7.50 a month. Now, I'm just making it monthly to make it easier numbers. But so if I net $7.50 a month, and I have 6 of those houses, those 6 houses make $4,500 a month, which is more than the $4,000 a month it takes me to live on. So my goal could be boiled down to just 6 free and clear houses. Now, that is a much smaller number than a lot of people talk about, and it's a very possible number to achieve. But when you're starting at 0, I had to determine how to acquire enough houses, and I had to acquire them first. So let's talk about that. I acquired 33 houses in 17 years. That's the time I was 18 till the time I was 35. 17 houses. Not 1,000 houses, 17. 17 rental properties which provide, 33 rental houses in 17 years. At the end of that time, at age 35, I had 4 kids. Those 4 kids were central to my life, and being home and spending time with them was real important. And 33 houses was more than enough to do that. So I spent the next 2 years boiling my portfolio down from 33 houses to 22 houses, which were better houses, better finance, more cash flow, less management, and a $300,000 mortgage portfolio. Now the question is, how did I get that done starting with 0? My dream of being a capitalist who had enough assets to live on led me to setting goals. Goals was, in my first incarnation when I was 18, it was to have $120,000 in capital that would earn 10%, which gave me $1,000 a month, which in 1965, 66 numbers, I could live on. Well, then, of course, the 4 kids came along and they disagreed with my goal. So we have to update the goals. But once I had the goals, I set my plans in motion to achieve my goals, and then I had to act on my plans. So realizing that every person does business, all commerce happens because they want to go from a position they find themselves in currently to a better position, better for them. So my job was to find out what people were dissatisfied with. So when I talked to somebody who was talking about selling a house, my first question always still is, why would you sell a nice house like this? Now, when I discovered that, Warren Harding had taught me all deals are built on the uncomfortable circumstances of others, of owners. So you're looking to discover the opportunity by discovering the uncomfortable circumstance, then building something to make people more comfortable. So in doing that, my first deal was a gentleman who I sold a house to. It's actually a 3-family house up on the North Shore of Boston. I sold it to him a year earlier, and he came to see me, and it was a great house, great neighborhood, and he said he wanted to sell it. He needed to get his $3,000 back out of it. Now recognize we're talking 1967, and so $3,000 back out of it. It had an FHA loan on it, and it had a home improvement loan on it. So what benefits are in this deal? I bought the house, giving him $3,000, $1,900 of which was all my savings, everything I had in the world. Then I needed to give him another $11,000, and I had to pay $500 in closing costs. And So I negotiated a sensational deal with my mom and dad. I borrowed $1,600 with no payments, no interest, no collateral, and no due date. And that $1,600 plus my $1,900 got my first property subject to a first and a second mortgage. The reason that house was available to me was because Albert, the owner of the property, had been offered a job 1,400 miles away. And that job offer that was available to him, a big step up in his career field, made that house go from being a valued, treasured home to being an anchor that stood between him and moving to take this job opportunity that he was faced with. So that was my first property. It was a subject to transaction with an FHA mortgage on it. Now, subject to is simply a disclosure. He gave me a deed, and he disclosed that he wasn't giving me fee simple title to the property. He was giving me fee simple title, except the title was subject to the unpaid taxes for the year 1967. Except for the utility easement, except for the first mortgage owed to the Beverly Savings Bank, except for the second mortgage owed to the Beverly Savings Bank. And that was my very first deal. Now, I had a catalyst in that deal. A catalyst is a third party that you bring into a deal to help make the deal happen. My first catalyst in that deal was my mom and dad, who lent me $1,600 with which to pay Albert and with which to pay the closing costs. I gave them a note, except my dad said, no, you don't need to give me a note. You just made me a promise. So I traded a promise for cash, and then the cash for the closing for the equity in the house. Now, what's the next catalyst I need to have? The next catalyst was somebody to pay those notes. And so that meant tenants. I had to trade the use of the house for rent from a tenant. So I gave the use of the 3 apartments in that house to 3 different couples who paid me rent, with which I paid the operating expenses, and I paid the Beverly Savings Bank on the first, and I paid the Beverly Savings Bank on the second. That was a critical deal for me. My very first deal. Now, I think in the, some of the material telling you might like to hear this tonight, Vena mentioned the deals beyond the deal. Let's talk about how important that was. That little home improvement loan to the Beverly Savings Bank, it was only a 3-year note, and it was about 1 year, almost 1 year gone when I bought the property. So 2 years and a month or two later, that $3,000 note was paid to 0. Now that was nice because that increased my cash flow by about $100 a month. What was nicer was I got a letter from the Beverly Savings Bank saying, "Dear preferred customer, congratulations on paying this obligation. If you'd ever like to borrow any money for something good like a car or a boat, come see us." Well, as it happened, I never went and bought a car or a boat and used them to finance it, but I did keep that letter, and I used it later in my life to get a loan from that bank, who made me the loan based on my track record and based on that letter calling me a preferred customer. So let's just move on now. After I bought that first property, I got a chance to buy a 4-plex. So I already had my 3 units, my very first deal, and this 4-plex I bought with 10% down in cash, which I had saved. I had earned commissions, spent as little as I could, and had a surplus that was $3,500. I bought this 4-plex with $3,500 down, 10% down, and I gave a promise as my currency. The promise took the shape of a note that I gave to the seller. That note to the seller was secured by a first mortgage. So I talked to the lady. She was tired of management, That's why she wanted to sell it. She was no longer living in town, so she was distant from her property. She was renting to students who were driving her crazy. And so those were the uncomfortable circumstances. And those were things I was willing to take on because I was in my very early 20s and didn't know any better. So I gave her 10% cash, which was all my savings, and a promise. But that promise came as a result of the rapport I built with her, the time I spent discovering why she'd sell it and what she'd done, how she'd bought it, what good and bad things it had done for her, and I bought that property. That promise got me a fourplex that is rented today for $1,100 a unit times 4. Okay? So, important. Now, when I got started, I needed help getting this done. And so one of the things that I did, that I begged you all to do, is to go and recruit allies. Don't talk to anybody without telling them that you are trying to build an estate. You are trying to acquire some real estate for your children, for yourself, whatever, and ask people for help. That is crucial because if you don't throw that pebble in the pond, to use that analogy, and send those ripples out, you're going to hear about many fewer places. So this next deal, actually, Vena and Drew and I were talking about this for just a second before I started. This next transaction I'm talking about is the single most important transaction of my life. I bought a triplex in 1970. I bought it from an old guy in his late 40s who was fed up with management. I bought it by promising to pay him $12,000 for his equity at 8%, payable $150 a month until paid. Now recognize, I was promising him $150 a month I did not have. So what was I planning to do? I was planning to use the use of the property to attract tenants who pay for that use, giving me enough income so I could keep my promise to John, the man that I was buying the property from. And I was going to take title subject to the first mortgage that was owed to the Beverly Cooperative Bank. John, the seller, was going to get a note from me, a promise of income, and management relief. Two very important things. So I promised him a note, I promised him management relief. What I also did was promise to make the payments on the first. And he said to me, listen, that bank is my bank. They were good to me. They made a loan to me which enabled me to buy this property. If they will allow you to buy it subject to, then we'll make this deal. If they won't, then I won't do the deal. So he set an appointment up, and we went up to the Beverly Cooperative Bank and talked to the president of the bank. Now recognize, here I am, a 21-year-old kid, a realtor who's making down near $8,000 a year at this point, and I'm being introduced to the president of the bank by a guy who's very successful and has been important to that bank. That was an important day for me. Now, when we went in, John said to the bank president, listen, this young man would like to buy my property, and I would like to sell it, but in order to buy it, he has to buy it subject to the mortgage. And the bank, and he said, what do you think of that? And the bank president said, John, we don't care a bit. You're the one who promised to pay us. You're the one we're going after if we don't get paid. If you don't mind doing that and you're okay with it, we'll be fine with it because we've got your promise, we've got your signature. So, John said that was okay, he'd do it. Then the president of the bank swung toward me and said, young man, you're going to assume this debt and you're going to promise the bank that if John doesn't pay us, you'll pay us. You'll be responsible. So I signed my first loan assumption agreement with the bank. It was hysterical to me that anyone would think if John couldn't pay that I possibly could. But I did. And let's talk about how terribly important that is. When he passed away in June of 2000, John and I had done 27 transactions. That bank in Beverly had financed 5 houses for me. Both John and the banker had referred many, many people to me. So when I talk about a deal you do is simply a seed from which many more and better fruit can grow. That's a very real analogy. In this transaction, that triplex, we still own it in my family. It's rented for $1,250 a unit. It's nice neighborhood, good rental property, now free and clear. Terrific investment, but that investment was the minimal return on that money and the trouble we spent in making that deal. It was all the referral business, all the repeat business that was so extraordinary that was born of that first deal. Now, Vena, if you can, if you put up the picture of the pallet, when I talk about the house, people tend to see it as though it were tools and you just cut it into even pieces. And you can give the profit to one person and you can give the amortization to another. Or you can give the thrill of management to somebody, and it might cost you some cash flow to give up the thrill of management. But what I really do in doing the transaction is I sit down with all the catalysts and all the people who have what I want and people who will take what I have, and I distribute those benefits. And the palette shows, I hope, that it's not clean like you cut a line, but indeed one thing overlaps another. Now, in the way back time when we were first doing transactions, we were out there every day seeking opportunities which we could then convert into good deals. And I think in the promotion for either the class on the weekend or for this talk tonight, they talked about you don't create a good deal. You go out and you chase opportunities. When you discover an opportunity, then you find out as much as you possibly can, and you construct a good deal. A good deal benefits all parties, and all parties, not just the buyer and the seller. The palette shows many of the different things you can use and that they can overlap. Well, back in 1977, John Schaub and I were old friends, and what would happen is we would have opportunities when we didn't have money. And if we had no money, we could almost be guaranteed we'd come across something that was an opportunity. And if we had money, nothing would come up. So in 1977, I found a deal found an opportunity up in Massachusetts. I entered into a transaction with seller financing, but it required $5,000 for closing costs and for a down payment. I didn't have $5,000. John put up the $5,000 and bought the house on the terms I negotiated. Then I lease optioned the house from John. The lease option said that I could give him $2,500, half of the $5,000, at any time for half of the equity. The lease that I signed gave me half of the cash flow. Literally, that was May of 77. In August of 77, John found a transaction or found an opportunity down in Sarasota and called me, and I put up $6,000. And I bought the house, and John lease optioned it, and he had the option to pay me $3,000 for half. So you can see how we can divide up the upside and the amortization and the cash flow, and that worked great. But because I was young and naive and aggressive, I made the mistake in the 1970s of guaranteeing a working capital line of credit for a restaurant. I can't begin to tell you how badly that turned out. And I found myself in the late 70s owing $90,000, having had a $90,000 loss and I had 4 little kids who were most unhappy with that lot. And it was really stressing us. And because I was dealing with other people and with friends, I called John. He said, John, I'm dying here. I'm drowning. So we changed the lease option to the point where I got 100% of the cash flow, but I only got 1/3 of the upside in the house. John got 2/3 of the upside and gave up the cash flow that I so badly needed. And that's one of the great things about dealing with investors and friends and dealing with people again and again and again. It's a people business, and that's where all the opportunities come from. If you'll take a look, if Vena will put up the next slide, it's really just a form. It's a brainstorming form that I use all the time. Now, I don't use the form, but I use the topics on it. And what I do is, where it says case at the top of the page, I usually write a person's name or an address, because those are the 2 keys that I key on. Then I write down what is the situation. The situation is all the MLS stuff about what the property is about, what it might rent for, what kind of debt is on it. More than that, who owns it, and what are they like? And do they have other things, or do they have no other things? They're only real estate. All the information about the people. So the property and the people go in situation. Then I have one that says problem. Now, as I always say when I speak about this, if you're really politically sensitive, then cross out problem and write challenge. But I'm telling you, what creates an opportunity is there's something making people uncomfortable. Now, what's an example of that? I talked to a gentleman who lived out of state, and he had his nephew living in his house. Now, as soon as I heard the word nephew, every one of you should have heard opportunity. The nephew was living in the house, not paying rent. Had not paid rent in 8 years he lived in the house, and was not maintaining the house. Do you think it's hard to make a deal with that uncle? I bought that house from the uncle, no money down, and offered to pay him half the rent that I would collect as long as I owned it until I paid him off. Now, half the rent meant that property will pay for itself. That was negotiated between 2 people. But what was the big benefit that I gave to him? I took the property with his nephew in it. And what was he able to say? He was able to say to the nephew, oh, I never would have sold it to him if I'd known he was going to do that. That was a very, very, very important lesson. That opportunity comes over and over if you keep your eyes open. Warren Harding told us to talk to people hypothetically, using suppose, in the event that, not hammering them about their property. And that proved to be very, very beneficial to me. I was at a house here in Seminole, just a few miles from where I live, and there was an older couple, and they owned the house. It had been a rental. They had a tough time with the last tenant, and they had $30,000 in equity. And so I said to them, in the event that I could arrange for you to have $5,000 right now, and $5,000 every Christmas for the next 5 Christmases, is there any reason why you wouldn't consider that? And he said, well, I'll think about it. And his wife said, no, there's no reason why we wouldn't do that. And we made that deal. I bought that house by giving them a note. I gave them $5,000 cash and a note payable $5,000 a year at Christmas each year for the next 5 years. I bought it with promises because I listened. I cared. I got to know them. And I presented it in a way that they could listen, and without any threat, they could say, yes, we're interested, or no, we're not, or tell me more. That's critical to making transactions. And now, that proposed solution was one of dozens you could create. So make sure when you're sitting thinking and you're writing down the proposed solutions, I might do this, I might do this, maybe this would work. You turn them over and do 3 or 4 or 5. Never do fewer than 3 before you ever make a presentation. Now, once you've got the problem written and the situation written, the proposed solutions take a little longer. But you don't criticize yourself or black hat and tell you, oh, that would never work. You simply get some proposed solutions written down. Then you write down what are the benefits. Now, the benefits to whom? The benefits are to the seller of the property, to you, certainly. If there's no benefits to you, you're probably not doing it. To a tenant who might be needed in order to fund this thing, to a rehabber who might be needed to fix the property up, to a lender who might be needed to buy the loan on the property, or who might be needed to make a loan to a buyer of the property. So all of those things you have to look and say, if I need these players, if I need these catalysts, what's in it for them? So once you've got those all written down, what benefits and to whom, now you have to say, if you go and present that and somebody says, great, let's split the upside 50-50 and I'll do all the management, and you shake hands and you say, how in the world do I document that? So before you go and present something, think, what would be the simplest and easiest way to document the deal, and write down what documents you need. Now, if you've done it the way I've just suggested, you'll have 3 or 4 or 5 pages in front of you, maybe more. I want you now to look at all the proposed solutions and grade them. And I do not want you to grade them according to which one's most beneficial. I want you to grade them according to which one is most feasible, which one is the easiest for me to get done. Because making a deal work, planting that seed, starting the goodwill that a closed deal creates, beginning the referral and the repeat business process is very important. It's good for your confidence in yourself and for building allies. Don't forget when I said go out and knock doors. I don't knock doors to buy houses. I knock doors to build allies. And so when I go into a neighborhood, I go into a neighborhood that I like and say, hi, my name is Peter Fortunato. I'm looking for a house in this neighborhood. How long have you lived here? And I listen to them, and I listen to them, and I listen to them, and I maybe ask them more questions. But before I leave, I always say this, and this is another note you should probably write down. Will you please, and underline, please call me or have your neighbors call me when you discover an excess house in this neighborhood? When I ask that question, people always say, well, what in the world is an excess house? And I explain it's a house where the kids have grown up and they've moved out, and you've got an older couple with 4 bedrooms. It's a family that just had twins and they need more space. It's somebody who inherited a house, and so it's excess. And I have just a quick discussion, but I then write on a piece of paper, not on the business card, looking for a house in the neighborhood. Many thanks, Peter Fortunato, and I leave my phone number. I write that on a piece of paper and leave it with them. And without fail, I get a call. Even now, 45 years after I started doing it, I get 1 or 2 or 3 of those calls every year where it's not a referral from somebody I have any idea who they are. It's somebody who calls us, my neighbor said you're looking for a house. That's very, very important. Now, the benefits that you can get in a house, recognize you don't need to buy a house to benefit from the house. I met with a woman who had a house for sale. When I asked her, why would you sell a nice house like this, she explained to me that her husband had died. And she and her daughter had to move to a less expensive house. Well, in talking to her, I discovered that she wanted to move down from the payment of $1,000 a month she was making to a $700 a month payment. Well, once I discovered that, I asked her to see her budget, and she didn't really have a budget, so I asked to see what recurring bills she had to pay, and it turned out that one of the bills she paid was $350 a month for a car loan. The car loan had a balance of $5,000. I bought an option on her house from her for $5,000, which couldn't be exercised for 3 years and had to be exercised before 5. That enabled her, with that $350 off her back, to stay in her house, keep her daughter in the house, enjoy the house, and use it for at least the next 3 and perhaps longer. That happened, giving me control of the growth, but leaving her with the ability to stay in and enjoy and raise her daughter in that house. All right? And so, in that case, I didn't buy a house. I simply bought an option. Had none of the rent, none of the thrill of management, just bought a piece of the upside. Now, similar situation, my son Mike was driving through the neighborhood here very near where I live, and he called me one day and said, "Dad, there's an old man dragging trash to the curb in a house here. It's in Madeira Beach." And so I dropped everything because I think there's an opportunity here. I drove over, met Michael at the house in Madeira Beach, waterfront house, a little tiny house, 850 square foot, 2-1, on the beach with a view of the island. And I talked to the couple who were in their late 70s. Thank goodness they were older than me after he described them as a really old man dragging trash to the curb. But when I met with them, I asked them why they were renting this house. And they told us it had been his mom's house. They had been left it, and they had been renting it for 10 years. Well, here in Florida, if you rent properties at the beach, you can't imagine how transient the tenants are. The people come in, they're moving from somewhere, they come to party. And so I knew this had not been a pretty picture, and seeing the 8 lawn bags full of beer cans and beer bottles, I knew this wasn't a happy experience. I asked how long they've been doing it. They've been doing it for 10 years. In 10 years, it turned out his wife had a lot. They had 16 different tenants. They had collected a total of $72,000 from 16 tenants over a decade. They did not want to sell the house. It was an important home to them, left by his mom. So we said, in the event that you could have the same $72,000 over the next 10 years with none of the excitement, with none of the phone calls, with no vacancy, is there any reason why you would rather have the same money with none of the work? And they said they'd rather have $72,000 with none of the work, never have to come back again except to visit the house and be proud of it. And so my son leased that house for a decade for $600 a month. Now that house today is rented for $1,250 a month. It's a nice waterfront house. We didn't get to buy it. The deed stayed with them. We didn't get an option on it. They didn't want to give up an option. We created a cash flow where our benefits would be cash flow. Or in that instance, we created inexpensive living, so my 24-year-old son got to live above his means in a waterfront house. And that's what it's about. It's about identifying the benefits and then distributing them and enabling other people to be happy and to prosper, and doing so yourself. I traded a guy who had a $90,000 mortgage on a house. He and his wife had a 3-bedroom, 3-bath waterfront house here. Not waterfront like the Gulf of Mexico, waterfront like a pond, but they call them lakes in Florida. And it cost him $1,395 a month. PITI to live in that house, plus it had big utility bills. His kids were gone. So I traded him 3 little 2-bedroom, 1-bath houses for his big house. So I went from $1,650 a month rent down to $1,195 a month rent, but it went from 3 tenants to 1. He did the deal because he could put a $25,000 loan on one rental house, $25,000 on the second rental house, and $40,000 on the house he moved into, and pay off his $90,000. And he went from pride of ownership to pride of cash flow. He got to live in one house and have 2 tenants, so his net cost per month was 0, down from $1,395. Gigantic change by giving him more tenants to service his debt. That worked out real well. He was happy from day one. His wife was happy for about 3 months. She hated living in that little rental house, and so what they did is they rented the third rental house and then took the rental income to supplement their income and rented a nice 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo, which is where they live to this day. And so that's just one more way to make a deal. There's millions of ways to make a deal, and only one of them involves cash. So I trade deeds for deeds on a regular basis. I trade cars. I traded a young man's Mustang when he had found himself with a wife and a baby. And that Mustang, which had been very valuable to him before, was now much less valuable. And since I could convert it into a down payment and buy them a house, all I had to do was talk to his wife, and he was convinced to give up the car and buy a house. But it's about the people. Now, in talking to Vena earlier today, she called me, and I was just finishing up on an assignment from a deal. I have a good friend, a real estate investor, who has got an offer to sell a house for $100,000. They're retiring. They're in their 70s. Their basis in the house is $20,000. So if they sell for $100,000 with a $20,000 basis, they're going to have an $80,000 gain, and the government is going to steal about 15% of that. Maybe a little more with recapture the depreciation. So what happened, they were hoping to sell and do an installment sale and carry a note and a mortgage. Now, why would a person want to carry a note and a mortgage rather than get cash? Well, if you'll take a look at the example that I talked about earlier, it's present position versus potential position. If they sell, and now there's no broker involved in this deal, they sell for $100,000, they net $85,000 after they pay the taxes. They put $85,000 in a local bank, and the best bank around here is going to be about 1%. You guys can plug in whatever number you find in Cincinnati. But at 1%, that is the equivalent of $850, so not even $75 a month. Now, he wanted an installment sale. I bought the house from him today for $100,000. No money down. Installment sale, 6%, 30 years. My payment to him is $600 a month for the next 30 years. If you'll take your financial calculator and put $85,000 in an account at 1% and take out $600 a month, you will find it'll run out pretty fast. And so the benefit to him of the installment sale was enormous. He didn't want to pay the tax. He wanted the $600 a month income to supplement his retirement, and he didn't want to outlive his money. So long-term income-producing investment was exactly what he wanted. So I gave him a note, or I'm giving him a note. We just did the assignment today. The closings will go down this way. I am going to give him a note for $100,000 for the property. No money down. I am going to give him a mortgage on one of my other houses. He's going to give me the deed to his house. I am going to sell it to the buyer for the $100,000 cash. So I will have bought a house for $100,000 and sold it for $100,000. No gain to me in that, no taxable event in that. he will have an installment sale. So on his $100,000 sale, he'll have to pay a tax on approximately 80% of the principal comes in as capital gain, and on all of the interest as it comes in. But he's got $600 a month for the next 30 years, and I've got $100,000 cash, which I can use to buy other houses or to pay off some of my houses that have uglier financing. For example, if I had shorter term financing. For example, if I had taken subject to an institutional loan and wanted to get rid of it. By buying a property and then selling that property and using other collateral, I can help somebody by giving them installment sale treatment, creating a benefit for them and creating a benefit for myself, and by refinancing, not by using a bank, but by helping other people to make a deal. And so the real estate business and real estate investing becomes a people-to-people, a microeconomic phenomenon. And when you read about the housing market worldwide, and you read about the housing market in the United States, and you read about the housing market in Ohio, and then in Cincinnati, and then in a specific neighborhood, it's really fascinating to read about that, because that is indeed the macro picture. But in our instance, we're not dealing with the housing market for the United States or the housing market for that specific neighborhood. We're dealing with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who just had twins and don't have a bedroom for them. We're dealing with Dave Jones, whose wife said, my mother is moving to Clearwater. And at that moment, Dave just had to get a condo to put her in so she didn't live at his house. It's about the people. And if you will get nose to nose with people and ask for help and tell them what you're doing, you'll be shocked at how much they'd like to help you, and how very often you get referrals and you get training. If you're in a neighborhood, and you clearly are, where there are people who are successful, you should be taking them out for lunch. That's as good a training as you can get. And say, how in the world did you accomplish this in this town? People who are successful are happy to share that success. And talking to them and asking for help is a very, very important part of doing business. I had a chance to buy a note at a discount. I had a chance to buy, and I'm going to just make up numbers because it'll make it easier. I had a chance to buy a note for $80,000 that had a face value of $100,000, and I didn't have $80,000. Instead of trying to come up with $80,000 I didn't have, I traded the note for a house. So I traded a $100,000 note, which I could buy for $80,000, for a $100,000 house. Perhaps more valuable than $100,000, but in my eyes, $100,000. That $100,000 house, I could easily borrow $80,000 against, which enabled me to buy the note that I used to get the house in the first place. I can rent the house for enough rent so I can afford to make the payments on the $80,000 I borrowed. And so it's all about seeing that house, seeing that palette, and recognizing that all the pieces of the deal are available to you. You simply have to care enough to find out, why would you sell a nice house like this? Opportunities are born of uncomfortable circumstances, and if you don't care enough to find out what those uncomfortable circumstances are, then you're just going to get lucky when you make a deal. Good transactions are made, and they're made by making a connection with people. Let me talk to you about one more deal. I don't know what time this thing's supposed to end, but I talked to a lady who had, and this is very much like the deal with Chet on the 3 houses, but she had an expensive house that she had built custom for sale. It was built in inventory, and it was an $800,000 appraised house. And she had it in multiple listings for quite a long time, and I don't know what the long time was, because she called me about it. Hadn't sold. She wished she'd taken the first offer she got. She didn't. She owed $550,000 on the $800,000 house. And so when she was talking to me about it, I asked her if she'd ever had any real estate investments or if she just bought and built and sold. And she said, no, I buy and build and sell. That's my business. But I have a number of apartment buildings which we hold as investments, and we've got a very good management company which manages out east of town. And so I said, well, I want you to go in MLS, commercial MLS, and I want you to go on LoopNet, and I want you to look up every apartment building you can find that's for sale. And if you hear about any that are for sale, I want you to offer to buy them and offer your free and clear single-family custom home as part of the payment. She sat down and over the weekend she wrote 23 offers. That's why exchanging can be so powerful, because instead of sitting back hoping and praying that someone wants to buy your house, you become the buyer and you initiate the contract. She wrote 23 offers. She got 3 acceptances contingent upon inspection of the house. She closed on an 8-unit building. She traded her house and $50,000 cash for the 8 units free and clear. Now, the 8 units had 8 tenants paying $900 a month each, $7,200 a month in income. She was able to put the $500,000 debt on that to erase the construction loan on her house, and the 8 tenants were able to pay it. By not sitting and waiting, we enabled her to get rid of a house that was a problem and to get another investment, a nice rental property for which she happened to have the management available to take care of it. It's very important to become a buyer and be an exchanger and offer any property that you don't want out to buy things you do want, because that's so much more proactive and so much more to the liking of an entrepreneurial person who wants to go and make things happen rather than just pray for things to happen. I traded with a gentleman here in Madeira Beach. I traded him a life estate in one of my rental houses. Now, a life estate means that they own the property as long as they live. At the end of their life, it reverts to me. So I'm giving them the house for the rest of their life, but not after. And from them, I took a remainder interest in their house where they reserved the life estate, so they stayed in their house, giving the time after they were gone to me in exchange for a life estate in my rental houses, which produced $1,100 a month, giving the remainder to me, giving the remainder back to me. So in both of those cases, we traded future estates for life estates. And so there is no limit as to what you can accomplish if you just spend some time determining what the people need. That gentleman, great man, in his 80s, he needed more income, and he could afford to give up growth that was going to come in after he was gone. So it was a smaller estate, in return for a smaller estate, he got more income now. So those are some of the stories of some of the deals that can be built. There's no end to what you can do if you just keep your eyes open and you have your goals in front of you. I mentioned earlier that in the 1980s I had a $300,000 mortgage portfolio. Those notes provided me with enough income so that I could live comfortably being home with my kids, but I spent every dime of principal and interest that came in on those notes. And I spent them on purpose because I had a portfolio of houses which were going to replace the loss of principal that I spent to live on. So that $300,000 mortgage portfolio, which I created between 1982 and 1984, I lived on until 1995 when my kids were launched. In 1995, that $300,000 was paid down to $85,000. But it still was producing $1,450 a month and promised to produce that $1,450 for about another 8 years. I no longer needed the income, and I was concerned about inflation. So even though I had notes, which had originally been 20-year notes and 25 and 30-year notes, I now had about 8 years left. I traded those notes for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage house to a gentleman who was in his 80s who's going to live with his grandkids and with his son and daughter-in-law. He was thrilled with the $1,450 a month income from the $85,000 note. I was thrilled with a house that wouldn't run out, wouldn't stop producing. Now that house that I bought, I traded for with my note in 1995, went from $85,000 when I acquired it to about $200 to $220 in 2006. Back down to about 75 in 2011, and back up now where it might be back to 100 and a quarter today. But in the meantime, I'm not a buyer who plans on selling. I'm a buyer who owns property for the production of income. The house is still rented. We have good tenants. We've owned it since '95. This is only the 3rd tenant we've had in the house. We're very, very happy with that house. We acquired a note, we enjoyed the income and the interest from that note, and we then traded it for a nice house to get back on the equity side in managing my portfolio, my family's portfolio. In 2010, I talked to a gentleman who owned a great house in a great neighborhood, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, double lot. Of course, they centered the house on the double lot. You only have one lot. It's a giant one. He was 80 years old, a real capitalist, a good guy I liked a lot. He came to visit me, and he was upset because he'd had about $9,000 a month in income coming in from his mortgages and a few small rentals. And he was 75. Now, 5 years later, between 2006 and 2010, that $9,000 had turned into less than $2,000 in income. Some of that was because the notes had amortized and so there was no payments left to be owed. Others were because the collateral had crashed in terms of value here in Florida, and so people had stopped paying him. He found himself with much less income, and he was older. So when he came to talk to me, I offered to trade him a $100,000, 6% interest-only 10-year note for his house, subject to a $38,000 first mortgage, which was private, so it was a human being that I didn't mind dealing with. So let's talk about that deal. When I gave him the $100,000 note, that gave him $500 in income. He gave me a deed. When I took that deed, what did that do to his income? It eliminated the tax bill, which was $3,000 a year. It eliminated the insurance bill, which was $1,500 a year. It eliminated a utility bill on a big house, which will be less in the smaller house he moved into. I don't know what that difference will be. It eliminated the lawn care. So on top of the $500 I gave him, there was another $600 a month that I relieved him of. So that transaction resulted in an $1,100 a month swing in his income. So we made that deal. I got a deed to a great house. Oh, and I'm sorry, and there was a $320 payment on the first mortgage, so we took that off his back as well. Now, I've got a great house. I'm just as happy could be with that house. Joe has got more income and relief from some expenses. Next thing we did, the young man who was paying $500 a month on the $100,000 note at 6% with a 10-year balloon is an aggressive young guy who really doesn't like having a balloon in his future. So we went back to Joe, who now owned the $100,000 note, and we made this proposal, and this was the way we actually closed and modified the note mortgage. We said in the event that we would double the payment from $500 to $1,000 a month, is there any reason why you wouldn't reduce the interest rate from 6% to 3%? So we'll double the payment if you'll have the interest rate. Joe agreed to do that. That meant that the payor on that note was paying Joe $1,000 a month for 10 years to zero instead of interest only 10 years to $100,000 a month. So those are the ways that transactions can be made when you deal with people. And dealing with people means communicating with people and making offers and doing them often, hypothetically, so you don't intimidate the socks off of people. I mentioned having the young man trade his Mustang as a down payment to buy a house. We've done a number of those deals, and typically that happens because the car no longer fits his lifestyle. I'm going to say 1990, I bought a house from an older gentleman who was 70 years old. I offered to pay him $540 a month for 30 years. His response was, I don't even buy green bananas. I don't want to take a 30-year note. I explained to him that a good friend of mine, Jack Miller, had told me once that it's inconvenient to be physically alive but financially dead. You wanted your finances, your assets, your capital to outlive you. And so I got him to sell me the house and take payments of it was $90,000 at 6% for 30 years, $540 a month. He was selling that house because he wanted to move back to Clearwater to be near his grandkids since his wife had passed. That was a house he was enormously proud of. He and his wife had built it. They loved that house. He made that deal with me. I made the payments as I promised him. He had a second house, a little cottage on the water. We sold that to a young couple for $50,000. Right about the same time as I bought the house on Floral. And they bought the house for $50,000. They moved into the house, and they never once made a payment. Not the first payment ever. And it took him 2 years to have them foreclosed and then evicted. When they were evicted from the house, he called me. And he said, Pete, you're going to buy my house on Dolphin Drive. I said, Lou, I'm not buying that house. I don't want that house. He said, yes, you are. I want you to buy it. I said, but Lou, I don't want to buy the house. He said, I don't care. You're going to buy the house. So I bought the house from him by adding the $50,000 on top of the $90,000 I already owed him for the first house. So now I owe him $140,000. And in return for that, he eliminated interest, and I paid $1,000 a month for 140 months to pay off those two houses. Now, those houses were an hour and a half from me. That's way too far away. So I'm paying $1,000 a month for 140 months for two houses. One's a very nice house. The other one's really a little better than a camp. I sold those two houses. I called Lou. Lou, the mortgage that I pay you $1,000 on every month, if I could arrange for you to have collateral closer to your grandchildren down in Clearwater where you're living now, is there any reason why you wouldn't rather have your collateral near you? And he said, no, there absolutely is not. So I met him at his bank where he signed 2 releases on the 2 properties that I owed him money on, releasing them as collateral, and I gave him a new mortgage on a property here in Clearwater. So now I still owe then I did owe him $1,000 a month, but he had other collateral. I was able to take the cash from the sale of those 2 houses an hour and a half away from my home and pay off 3 houses down here in Pinellas County, one of which I gave him as collateral, and then I was able to buy 2 additional rental houses with that money, still keeping the 0 interest financing that I had negotiated with him. Now, one of the most interesting things is we did a number of deals, and the longest deal we ever did was 20 years. We started at 30 on the one on Floral, but then I negotiated it down to 12 years when I bought the other house from him. But the 20-year note that I was paying him, one of the neatest memories I have was November 1st, 2009. I got to drive to his house. It had been 20 years. This was the last payment on the mortgage that I owed him. I drove to his house, gave him $1,000, and he was 97 years old. And I explained to him that if he hadn't been such a pessimist, he could still have income coming in. But he told me that crack about green bananas, and he didn't want income coming in too long. And so this is the last $1,000 he was ever going to get from me. And I went and paid him in cash just so I could have that discussion with him. And so it's just so remarkably rewarding to talk to people, to help them, and then in turn be helped by them. I sold a house in 2006. So really at the height of the market. 2 young guys who I liked. And remember, who I liked, that was an important part of why I made the deal. I sold the house to a guy I liked, and he just got totally beat up. He lost his job over the next 2 years. The house I sold him, which appraised for $119, became worth $60. He finally took another job in Atlanta. He called me up and he said, Mr. Fortunato, I don't want to cause you any problems, but can I just deed you the house back? And I said, well, no, I don't want the house back. Now, it hadn't been a loan. I had not lent him any money. It had been seller financing. I'd given him a house in return for his promise. And so it was correct to say he's going to give me the house back. But I didn't want it. So I said, listen, if you'll just give me a couple days, I'll find someone for you to deed the property to. So I went and found another young man. And having found that next young man, I had the guy from Atlanta deed the property to this young man who I liked, and I modified the $80,000 note, making it $50,000 and lowering the payment to where he can afford it. So now I've got a performing note, and there was no need for any foreclosure or any ill will. So in any case, those are a few of the deals. I'm delighted. I understand there's some questions out there. You guys have been very quiet. I look forward to the questions, and thank you for listening to me so far. What are the questions?
And yes, and I don't even know what to say. Like, I go to your classes, I walk out of them, I say, oh my God, I can't believe I learned something after, 25 years in the real estate business, and then 2 or 3 years passes, and I haven't gone to one, and I'm telling everybody, you should go to this class, it's awesome, but really I forgot how good you are. And then I hear it again, and I'm like, all that stuff I was saying about how great it was is even greater than that. So we do have some questions here from folks that have been on the line with us, but before we jump into those, I want to quickly let folks know that you are going to be in Cincinnati on August the 9th and 10th at this class, which is a real class. This is not a 2-day sales pitch or something else. He will probably forget to mention that he even has other classes other than this. You get a full manual. He walks through the contract, the transaction. You got lots of time to ask questions. There's a lot of different examples from different kinds of deals. There's note buying and lease options and owner financing and all sorts of deals, but you get a lot more time to go through each one and ask questions about it and see what the paperwork looks like, which is very, very important, and which, of course, is hard to do on a webinar. This class is embarrassingly cheap. If I were running it, there would be a 1 in front of the $397. I'd be charging like $1,400 for it, but it's Cincinnati REIA hosting it, which, of course, is a nonprofit group. It's $397 to attend. If you register before this Thursday, you have to register before this Thursday to get this price. $397 for one, $597 for two, and two means a spouse, a business partner. It doesn't mean some guy you met on the street and went, oh, wouldn't it be cool to go to Pete Fortunato. After that, you can still register if we have space. It'll be $497 for one or $697 for two. You can register at CincinnatiREIA.com, or you can call in the morning and talk to Kathy at 513-407-3137. Please stop texting me and asking me if you can get some kind of special deal if you're a student of mine, because this is not my event. This is Cincinnati REIA's event, and also it's $397. I mean, seriously? It's $397. It's a full 2-day workshop with a manual, and you know, Pete pretty much will talk real estate with you in the bar until 2 in the morning if you let him. So worth much more in terms of what you're going to walk away with for ways of doing deals creatively. And I'm going to open up the question and answer panel again because I closed it. Okay, so wow, lots of questions here. Scott says, I fully 100% understand why you're so excited about having Mr. Fortunato on. Thank you. So I guess that was more of a comment than a question. Okay, so here's a question from Gail, and Pete, I know you're used to talking, I think, more to people who've been around the block a few times, and sometimes newer investors listen to you and they say, well, that's great, he's been in it for 45 years, but how do I ever accomplish this?
Yeah.
Gail's question is, I love the idea of doing creative or seller financing, but when I try to imagine why they would deal with me, I can't think of why they would because I'm a brand new investor. Any advice?
Okay. Yeah, get publication 537. What are you laughing at now?
Wasn't they
bring tax code to them?
Publication,
go on, I'm sorry.
Publication 537 explains very simply, and it's like 35 pages, what installment sale is. And if when you're talking to people who have an investment property, the ability, just like the $100,000 example I gave earlier, the ability to carry a note and not pay the taxes gives you income for years and years beyond the time when your money will run out if you just simply take the money and put it in the bank. And if you tell them that, that's hard. You have to enable them to get it on their own. And Publication 537 is a relatively simple way to introduce it, and just tell them, go talk to their CPA. Now, you remember we talked about the house. At the bottom of the house, it says security. It's the foundation for the deal. If they don't feel that you're competent and that you're trustworthy, then they're going to be afraid to do business. So it's your job to get to know what you're doing. When I started, I didn't have any real deals I'd done myself, but I sure did learn, and so I was able to say to people, well, I read about a guy who had a situation like yours, and he solved it this way. Is there any reason why you couldn't do that? I have a friend who had a situation like yours. He solved it that way. Is there any reason why you couldn't do that? So you can teach them from your educated position until you get to the point that you're able to teach them from your own example. That said, every time you keep your word to someone, you want to keep evidence of it. So that means when I got that first note, remember I bought that house on Thorndike Street and it was a $3,000 home improvement loan on it, and it was already a year into it, so just 2 years later, the Beverly Savings Bank sent me the Dear Preferred Customer letter and a copy of the note mark paid. I kept that note, and I'd show it to people and say, I do pay my bills. Here's one. Talk to them. And then with John Pochap, because I did more and more deals, I'd say, talk to John. And so that's what you're building, and indeed it will be more difficult before you have a track record, but you can't wait until you have a track record. My first property was a subject to. My second property was seller carry. The people did not know me, aside from the fact that I had pursued their house, talked to them about the house. I did put 10% down. That was from my savings. And again, it helped me that I was part of a large family in that community. Everyone in that family was well thought of, and that was a huge help to me getting started.
That actually leads into another question asked by Tom, which is, he says, many speakers advise that you should not use your own money but use private money instead. They say this eliminates or reduces your risk. However, you are as obligated to a private money lender as you would be to yourself. Question, what is your opinion about using your own money in real estate transactions? It seems you have used it in the past.
Yeah, I would never take and use someone else's money if I didn't have to. Because the obligation, the liability, the risk, I don't want to take somebody into a deal with me. Now that said, if I'm a lender and I wanted to lend money and I'm looking for a deal, and you called me and said, I've got a terrific deal, I don't want to lend to you on the deal you're going to do. Because the deal you're going to do, you may mess up. But if you've got a good rental house that you've had for 5 or 10 years, I might well make you a loan on that. And so with me, if I'm going to borrow money to buy a house that I think I could flip, or a house that needs to be renovated and then refinance so I can keep it as a rental, I will borrow against a house I've had for 10 years that we know is safe, rather than ask a civilian or a friend to share the risk on a new venture, because new ventures are dangerous ventures. And so I don't like using other people's money for new deals at all, and if I can possibly fund it, my first choice to fund it is with a seller. It's not to use money. Now, I tell people all the time, when you use dollars, you're proving you're either intellectually inadequate or you're lazy. Because no one wants those dollars. There's something that they're chasing that they're going to use the dollars for. And it's your job to find out what they are.
All right. Now, Pete, I'm going to ask you to make a command decision here, which I will then pass on to REIA. And I think I know what your answer is going to be. But Bob has 2 kids that I believe are like 14 and 16 or 13 and 15, and he wants to know if he can bring them to your class.
Of course he can.
And I'm going to say that if somebody wants to bring, an interested, well-behaved, let's say 14 to 20-year-olds, if they pay, the kid can come for free.
I couldn't be happy with that. I like to talk to kids. I am one, just a really old one. I talk whenever I find a teacher naive enough to invite me into the school. I have a talk called "Don't Grow Up to Be Like Your Teachers, Your Parents, and Your Neighbors." And I talk about capitalism. It'll be really good for the kids.
Do you tell the teachers ahead of time that that's the name of your talk?
No.
Oh boy. All right. So a couple of I'm going to kind of combine Bill's questions here. He said, first of all, he says that he was a member of the Warren Harding Real Estate Academy a million years ago.
Wow.
And that this was an awesome presentation. But then he has an actual question, which is, do you still take over loans today subject to with the due on sale clause that a traditional lender would have in it?
Absolutely I do. Now, there's three different levels, I think. First of all, I'll take subject to a note owed to a human being, with or without a due on sale clause. I will take title subject to a note owed to a portfolio lender. A lender that actually lends their money and then has an investment in the note. A pretender lender, one that says mirrors, a criminal, I'm going to be much more cautious with, because you get servicers who don't make logical decisions, and you can't count on them. So I've lost a couple $100,000 buying property subject to pretender lender loans. So I'm really not a fan of that, and would be most hesitant to recommend that anybody else did that.
Okay. Jim wants to know if there's any way that you could just do a mind meld and directly transfer your genius into his mind.
Well, I don't think that it has anything to do with genius. I mean, I really think it has to do with focus, and an enormous number of years. This August is 49 years. Good grief. That's a long.
Yeah, I think the closest he's going to get to a mind meld is $397 to come to today's class. And I keep telling people over and over, the first time I went to your class was around 96. I went to the One Step Beyond class because I'd been in real estate at that point for all of 7 years. And I figured One Step Beyond was probably where I was at that point. And I walked out of there, I walked in feeling like I was like a super successful real estate investor, and walked out going, oh my God, I only understood like 40% of what he said. But the thing was, I implemented that 40%.
Yeah. And
that was absolutely, the word life-changing is used too often when it refers to real estate education, but it completely changed the way I looked at deals and did deals, and it was things I just never heard from anyone else. And when you say things like, well, it's all about the people, and go door knocking and just, ask people why they want to sell a nice house, it seems super sensible, except I bet most of the people on the call have never heard anyone say that before. And to have 2 days of that is, I mean, you walk out and you just have a completely different view than what you get from the typical, webinars and creative finance classes where it's kind of a one-trick pony class. They're going to teach you how to do one thing, and so you've got a hammer and you're wandering around looking for a nail. And I can't recommend this highly enough. And Jim just spring for the $397, seriously. Okay, so Karen, and this is in response to, you had said that you go around and you just sort of tell people what you do. She said, what do you say when you tell them what you do? Do you tell them that you're an investor, that you buy and sell houses? What is it that you're actually saying?
I say, I buy houses. I rent them. When I go to the real estate meetings around here and they go around the room, I say, my name is Peter Fortunato, I'm a landlord. That's what I do. I keep houses. I rent them and keep them. The houses that we bought in the 60s when I was in college, with only 4 exceptions, we still have in my family. That's what I do. I buy property and keep it.
We have had 2 questions now, one from Hildy and one from Scott, that sprang from something you said very early on about sitting out on your dock and reading. And the question is, what do you like to read? And please don't say IRS publication.
Well, actually, my kids used to tease me a lot about the fact they'd come in and find me lying on the couch laughing and really interested, and I'd be reading Commerce Clearinghouse Master Tax Guide. That really, they really got a kick out of that. But I enjoy reading an awful lot of economics. I read a lot of the real things that come in from variety of readers just to see what people are doing. I enjoy Mises stuff, Ludwig von Mises. I really enjoy and have not had too much time to read it recently, but I really enjoy future history type of science fiction that talks about if we are here now, where might that lead? I don't know if anybody ever read Fear No Evil, but that was a story that Robert Heinlein wrote after the first heart transplant. He said, if we can have transplants, where might that take us? And it led to a person who died and had his brain put into a body or his body put on a brain, whichever it was, and the people that stood to inherit said, oh no, you're not him, you're the guy whose body he's now wearing. And so that he had to go to court to try to keep his estate. And I really like that kind of speculation about if this is happening, where's it going to take us in the future. I very much enjoy those kinds of books.
Do not be surprised.
Escape by F. Paul Wilson for the 15th time. And that's a book that everybody should read, especially today.
Don't be surprised if you get a marriage proposal from Drew later.
And I already understand Pansel. You know, we're on that level.
Yeah. Now, I have my Tim Staffel Trust, and the people at the bank say, oh, is that an old family name? I say, yes.
All right, well, now you have to let everybody else in on the joke.
Well, everybody knows what Tim Staffel means.
No, they don't, because they haven't all been to your seminars.
Yeah, that's not my seminar.
They haven't all read Heinlein.
Right. It means there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. It's a perfect lending company.
Okay, got just a couple more questions here. It sounds like you get most of your leads by referral, and it sounds like you may not know exactly what you're going to do, but you pursue it if it smells like a good deal. Is that a fair statement, and how do I develop that sense of smell?
I get virtually everything I do is repeat referral business today. I mean, literally everything. And so I'm dealing again and again with people who are at the very least friends of friends. So the part about competent and trustworthy is generally no longer an issue. People come to me. I always have a sense. It's my belief, and I think, if you listen to me very long, you realize there's a million ways to do a deal. So if you can't do it one way, you can do it another way. So I always believe there's a way to make it easier. When we sat down with that older couple in Madeira Beach when my son Michael had identified them, we didn't for a minute think we were going there not to buy that house. But when we found out that was his mom's house, they had no intention of ever letting it go. But that didn't mean there wasn't a deal there. The deal just happened to be a 10-year lease at $600, allowing my son to live above his means. He was the only one in his senior class in college who was living in a waterfront house with a beach and a dock and a view to the island. And so that was our profit in that deal. And we didn't see that going in, but you see the picture of the house with all those different pieces? All of those pieces are not needed by everybody in every deal, and you can choose which ones you can take at little cost to other people. The value is different from one person to another. You wouldn't want to waste the depreciation and tax shelter on yourself by taking it if you had a friend who was in the 39.8% tax bracket. Much better to give that tax benefit to the guy in the high tax bracket rather than waste it. So you distribute it where it does the most good.
Okay. Alfred says, if one can't travel to the class, can one buy the course book and have it mailed? Doesn't quite work like that, Alfred. I've now been to, I think I've been to this class probably 4 times, and the course manual has been completely different every time because he kind of puts in it what he's been doing lately, and it's not something that you really can follow if you're not sitting there listening to the explanation. I mean, I
think that's
I'm wrong here, Pete.
It's not a textbook; it's a workbook.
Yeah. Yeah. So you need to find a way to get down here. Pete, I don't know how many seminars you do a year. It's not a ton, but I know most of them we would either have to travel to Florida or California to attend. So Cincinnati's kind of a unique opportunity for those of us to live within, some reasonable driving distance of the Midwest here. And I really would encourage you, Alfred, to find a way to get here on August the 9th and 10th. Somebody's saying you need your own talk radio station, not show. You apparently need your own talk radio station. You're a deal-making maestro. If you don't want me to read the compliments, I'll stop, but that's what we have here. Joe wants to know what the class hours are on the 9th and 10th.
There's 9 to 5 or so.
9 to 5, and then there's the meeting after the meeting. Okay. Tom says, have you encountered much resistance in getting deeds from sellers in subject to deals? Might not the sellers be insecure about doing this when the loan stays in their name?
Yes, some might and others aren't. I mean, I've done deals where people have given me deeds subject to. I've done contracts for deeds. I've done wraparound mortgages. I've done lease options, all of which was some form of doing a subject to, and it largely came down to what they were most comfortable with.
Okay, and actually, wraparound mortgages aren't something that's super well known in this part of the world, but it is a really good way to overcome that fear that you're not going to pay my bank. And I know you talk about that a lot too, so that would be another good reason for people to come to the meeting.
Yeah, I bought a house on 102nd Avenue here, and I was absolutely sure I was going to do a wrap mortgage with the people who were moving to Indiana. And I was presenting it to them, and the grandfather was watching the children in the living room. And as I'm making the presentation, the grandfather walks in and says, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but that sounds just like a land contract. Your mother and I did 2 of those land contracts when we were up in Michigan, and they worked great. So once the father endorsed it, we did a land contract."
Uh-huh. Yeah, I had one of those recently where I wanted to buy it subject to, but the guy was only familiar with land contracts, and so I was like, okay, same terms,
exactly.
but don't really care what you want to call it.
Yep.
Okay, so and actually we have this question twice as well. And I know you're gonna when you come and talk about the deals at the class, you sort of talk more about both ends of it, like how did I buy it and then what did I do with it. But there was I think there was a disconnect here because we've had this question twice. Do you manage your own rentals or do you have a property manager?
Both. I have always, when I was a kid, I was a fantastic manager. But I was frightened. I mean, I made sure the rents were paid. Now, I'm older, we have more assets, and I don't manage as well. Now, my average tenant's 9.5 years, so when we put people in, we put good folks in who stay a long, long time. However, we've got a young guy that I've done business with. Again, I really like him, and I sandwich lease the properties to him. When I get a new property, or if one of my old properties goes vacant, I lease them to Mike, and Mike subleases them and makes a profit, because Mike will attend to it right away, and I can be free to go to attend a seminar, or to go do whatever I darn well please, but it pays for itself because he gets it filled so much more efficiently than I would. So I'm ashamed to say that I don't do a good enough job, so I've fired myself and replaced myself with a man who I sandwich lease to on all my new stuff.
And you just told these people something that can ease their lives beyond anything that they can imagine on their rentals, and you just kind of talked about it like it was something everybody should know about, and I really hope they understood what you just said, which is really you didn't hire a property manager. You found somebody with more energy than you had to take over full responsibility and pay you every month whether or not the property was filled.
And he has his own properties. He really does know how to manage. The guy I've lent money to, he's always done exactly what he says. Honorable guy. Long term, I've known him for 15 years, and I'm just thrilled to have him working and helping me.
So many fantastic ideas. You all need to get down to Cincinnati on August the 9th and 10th. It's $397 for one, $597 for two if you register by Thursday. After Thursday, it goes up $100. It's $497 for one, $697 for two. If you're checking plane tickets right now, because I see we've got a lot of people from states where it would be a 7 or 8 hour drive to get here, you might want to check tickets into Dayton, because the Holiday Inn Hawk Road is about halfway between the Cincinnati airport and the Dayton airport, and Dayton is typically cheaper to fly into if you're looking for plane tickets. But get signed up by Thursday so that you can pay the $397 price. But even if you can't manage to get time off work or whatever, just get signed up. I don't care how you do it. It's awesome. I will be there both days. I'm gonna learn as much as you guys do. And Pete, I want to really thank you for your time tonight and for your willingness to travel to the hinterlands of Ohio to do this 2-day event for Cincinnati REIA coming up in August. Again, at CincinnatiREIA.com to register, or 513-407-3137. You can leave a message now, but of course it'll be 9 to 5. I just got a question about, is there a special room rate at the Holiday Inn through Cincinnati REIA? We will negotiate that and let everybody know within the next day or two what that is. But hotel rooms in Cincinnati are not that expensive, just FYI. If you're from New Jersey or something and you're used to Super 8s costing $119 a night, that's not the way it is in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
So again, Pete, thank you very much.
All right. I had a great time. Thank you very much.
And we look forward to seeing you at the REIA meeting on August 7th and then on the 9th and 10th. Everybody else, thanks for joining us. Have a great night. We'll see you in August, and happy investing.
Thank you, Vena.
Thanks, Pete.